So I'm not sure if Ben's on with us yet. Yep, Ben's here. So
nice.
You wanna go straight to our interview segment?
Let's do it.
There he is. Hey, Ben.
Hey, Anna, Nando.
How's it going? Very
Good
Miami heavy show. Anna has some ties to Miami. Ben lived in Miami. I'm from Miami. The Miami is taking over left media.
Yep. I love it. Ben, I'm ready for you to give us some arguments. We are actually going to weigh in on an argument. More of a debate that happened recently on the Bad Faith podcast. So let me set this up and go to some clips, and I can't wait to hear your take on it. And by the way, for those of you who might not know, I can't imagine you don't know Ben Burgis. He's the host of the podcast Give Them an Argument. It actually airs every Saturday, and you share a Zoom link to it on your Twitter account, right, Ben?
I have been doing that. Zoom has been getting a little annoying, so with the webinar features, so I switched to just doing like a YouTube stream for the patrons, and then it gets it's edited, and then it comes the like nice edited version premieres on YouTube on Mondays at 7:30 p.m. EST.
Love it. All right, everyone, check out Ben's Patreon page, and let's get to it. Let's talk about this debate. So,
okay, what is now? Do we know what Whoopi thinks about what leftists should do in swing states?
The only thing we're scared about is ensuring that we don't elect anyone that's going to increase our taxes. Okay. Like I remember the lead up to that interview with Bernie was just complaining about like, I worked hard for everything I have, and why should I pay like higher taxes? Like that was really the motivating factor in her line of questioning there. But unfortunately, Bernie Sanders is not the Democratic candidate. That was one of the more heartbreaking things that happened this year, and it's been a heartbreaking year overall. And so many leftists are, trying to grapple with what to do next, right? What is the effective strategy moving forward? And there is a bit of a debate amongst progressives on whether or not it makes sense to vote for Joe Biden, even as Joe Biden has refused to concede to some of the policy proposals that leftists desperately want, but more importantly, the country desperately needs. And so Briahna Joy Gray, who was the national press secretary for Bernie Sanders, has launched a podcast. It's excellent. It's called Bad Faith. And on that podcast, she invited Noam Chomsky on to engage in this debate. So with that said, let's listen to the first clip.
In the same way that voting blocs like unions have been able to coordinate masses of voters and deliver them to politicians in return for certain promises, that some portion of progressives, be they leftist, former Sanders supporters, young people, Black Lives Matter protesters, whatever collective group there is, could condition one's vote for Biden against Trump on Joe Biden delivering some goods the same way, yes, the Sunrise Movement did.
Now, let's take that position. Suppose you're one of these people. Do you intend to vote against Trump on November 3rd?
Conditioned on whatever terms.
Not conditioned. Suppose that your demands were not met. Would you vote against Trump?
Then no, there's no persuasive value. There's no leverage if the vote is unconditional.
You wouldn't vote against Trump.
No, in this scenario, yeah.
Right, which means you would help Trump win, because not voting for one candidate, not voting for Biden, is equivalent to putting Trump one vote ahead. So your choice is, okay, if they don't do what I want, I'll essentially vote for Trump. I'll put Trump ahead. I don't think that's a wise decision.
So, Ben, I want to toss to you immediately because I want to get your thoughts on, both of their arguments.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that Briahna is speaking to a really understandable kind of frustration. I think it's important to take that seriously and not like condescend to it or scold people who have those hesitations about voting for Biden. But I mean, lay my cards on the table. I am basically on Team Noam here. I think that there are certain ways as the discussion goes on that I'd make the argument a little bit differently, but I think he lands in the right place. And I think one thing, like maybe just as a starting point, is that given the argument that she was making there, actually, you should, like, if what you really want to do is like have like maximum leverage, then you should actually not just be voting for like Howie Hawkins in a swing state. You should be saying, hey, if we don't get what we want, we'll vote for Trump. I mean, that would be the thing that would like actually be the biggest threat to the Biden campaign. Would be directly voting for Trump, but of course they're not going to do that, right? Briahna, Joy Gray, and Virgil Texas are never going to advocate that because they would never vote for Trump, which they shouldn't, right? That's nobody should. But I think that really what that exposes is that maybe there are two different things that get jumbled up in this argument. One of them is this kind of tactical case that Briahna is pushing. And the other is this sort of principled case that we can't vote for either Trump or Biden because they're both just so bad that neither of them should be voted for. And I think that where I'd kind of get off board from the way that Chomsky's pushing back, even though, like I said, I think he basically lands in the right place, is that the whole discussion was sort of about this issue of how it is that you can pressure mainstream Democrats like Biden to move left. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty cynical about that. I actually think that no matter what the left does, they're not going to meaningfully move left. I mean, at best, they might say during a campaign that they'll do some of the things that we want. But I think if you can remember, like the Obama administration and card check and all of that, even if they did, I wouldn't take it very seriously. I think that however you decide what the left strategy should be during the election, I don't think it should be based on any illusions that we can turn like a corporate centrist like Joe Biden into like a Bernie Sanders style social democrat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and I think you make a great point there. Go ahead, Nando.
Well, it's interesting because again, I think that you're right that you have to like unpack these arguments seriously and not do like, oh my God, can you believe, all that kind of stuff is just like the most unhelpful, counterproductive thing. But I think that, when she talks about the relationship that labor had to the Democratic Party, I mean, this is not like a new debate, right? Like this is something that labor leaders have debated for decades, right? And there was, there were some labor leaders in the middle of the 20th century frustrated with the Democratic Party who some of them like broke rank kind of thing and supported Republicans. And it was unclear that actually had any meaningfully positive effects for labor. But my point about it is that for Briahna's kind of leverage argument to work, you need some sort of organizational mechanism to even begin to consider something like exercising demands and then kind of organizing as a block to do like without some organization like a labor union, which we don't have, by the way. I mean, there's
totally like
so the preconditions are just not there is what I'm at,
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Like this, I mean, it kind of reminds me of the way that a lot of liberals will talk about how they're boycotting things when what they really mean is just that they're making individual consumer choices not to buy them.
Right.
It's like, oh, you want to get this? No, I'm boycotting them. It's like, well, no, if it were a real boycott, you wouldn't start with the word I, right? That like there's like an actual boycott that could be effective would have to be
right.
Like any of the historically effective boycotts, like the Montgomery bus boycott, would tend to be geographically concentrated. They're certainly, well organized. There's some sort of enforcement mechanism.
Right.
Like it's not just a bunch of individuals, deciding to make some consumer choice, which would, like you said, that'd be the equivalent of what Briahna's advocating there, is just a bunch of individual leftists not making this decision. And presumably, I would guess that what you want is for them to vote for Howie Hawkins, the Green Party candidate, especially like if they're just not voting at all, as Chomsky points out at several points of the debate, then all you're doing is you're just blending into the great mass of people who for all sorts of reasons don't vote. That certainly doesn't send much of a message. But even if you think you're going to send a message by voting for Hawkins, which, by the way, I should say, I'm not going to, because I'm voting in Michigan, and and that could go either way, so I will hold my nose and vote for Biden. But if I live if I lived where you guys do, I might vote for Hawkins, because why not, right? I mean, no force on earth will mean that will lead to Donald Trump getting California's electoral votes. And I think that it's a reasonable. I don't think it's going to accomplish much. I don't think it could lead to an electorally viable third party, but I have no problem with it just as a protest. But I think it is really clear that that's all it is. And as far as Briahna's leverage argument, I think that the evidence is in, right? This isn't an untried experiment. In 2000, 3 million people voted for Ralph Nader, and the Nader vote in Florida famously was way bigger than at least the alleged spread between Bush and Gore. And the Democrats didn't respond to that by moving to the left and nominating Dennis Kucinich or somebody in 2004. They nominated John Kerry. And then when Kerry lost, it just continued like that. We've tried this experiment so many times, and it never works. That the Democrats will never conclude, oh, a bunch of leftists voted for a third party, so therefore we have to become social democrats to capture this energy. Instead, they'll just score points by hippie punching, by demonizing the left. The effect is to discredit the left, and that was honestly, the sort of way that Democrats would hold these 1984 3 minutes hate sessions about Ralph Nader, was I think a major factor in suppressing the left for a very long time after 2000, and even in 2016, there were swing states like Michigan where the Jill Stein vote was bigger than significantly bigger in some cases than the Trump-Clinton gap. And then not only did the Democrats not move to the left, we got Joe Biden in 2020, who was the only one of the centrists who wasn't even pretending to latch on to even a modified version of big parts of the Bernie program. So I just don't think that would work. And to be clear, I don't have some alternate strategy for here's how we turn centrist Democrats into leftists. I just don't think we could do it. I think that what we have to do is just beat them in primaries.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. And, I think part of what frustrates me about this ongoing debate, because it is ongoing, is that some on the left seem to think that we have leverage when we don't. There is no leverage, right? We have no power right now. And I think it's important to be honest about that. I'm not trying to be defeatist. I'm trying to be honest so we can actually move forward from a place of reality, as opposed to... Yeah,
we have to be real about our dismal starting point. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And we have a dismal starting point, partly because we're not organized, and we don't have a well-organized voting bloc that can, use its leverage to, push for things that we need. And that's what we need to focus on organizing right now. I mean, that should be happening right now.
Yeah, totally. No, I was just going to say, it's also not, I think we need to think hard about what it would actually mean to organize that, right? Because the other argument, the one that Briahna's not making, but that sometimes people who are on that side of the argument make, is, oh, it's not about pushing the Democrats to the left. It's about creating this third party that could compete in elections itself. And what we really want is for some future Green Party candidate to become president. But I think it's worth thinking about history and realizing that it never happens that way. Right. It's never going to happen that Jill Stein's, 1% of the vote becomes, Howie Hawkins 2.5% of the vote. And then you just keep pushing. And then 20 cycles later, you win. That's not how new parties emerge. If we ever did get an electorally viable third party in America, it would happen the way that Abraham Lincoln's Republican Party emerged, just kind of organically from the collapse of the Whigs. Their anti-slavery wing, kind of became a new party. And I don't know if that'll ever happen or not. I think that's just a contingent, historical question, but that is how it happened. And so if you actually want to get to the point where you could do either one of those things, there's a great article in Jacobin from, a couple months ago by Dustin Gostella, called Like It or Not, If We Run Third Party, We'll Lose. And he talks about this in there. And he says that like sometimes we talk about this as if the difference between like taking over the Democratic Party, starting a third party, whatever, as if these were like strategies that we can pick and choose from. But that's not really the way it works. These are possible outcomes of a process. The process is building up the left, which right now, like it or not, is happening in Democratic primaries. And if we're going to build up our own electoral force, I guess I just don't see any other way besides continuing to do that.
So let's go to the next clip. And in this video that you're about to watch, Joy Gray argues that Biden just isn't doing what it takes to earn progressive votes, and she gives specific examples.
If people are asking Joe Biden to do things that are electorally beneficial to him, if they're asking him to support policies like the Green New Deal that overwhelming majorities of Americans support, including a bipartisan majorities of Americans, and yet he still declines to adopt said policies. Yes, he moved someone on the Green New Deal. He went from a $1.7 trillion plan over 10 years to a $2 trillion plan over 4 years, and that is meaningful. Of course, it pales in comparison to the level of investment that many climate scientists say is absolutely necessary for us to meet the UN IPCC goals to actually getting where we need to be in terms of degrees Celsius change.
All of this is common ground, but it's missing the point.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, what are you intending to do on November 3rd? If you say, and you mean what you're saying, if you don't vote, put Medicare for all on your program, I'm going to give a vote to Trump. If that's what you mean, say it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then what you're saying is, if I don't get what I want, I'm going to help the worst possible candidate into office. I think that's crazy.
So I wanted to bring up a topic that I think is kind of lost in a lot of these discussions, and it's the topic of how Joe Biden's campaign is influenced, funded, who helps his campaign materially, right? And so here's what we're up against. On the left, we're dealing with people who are demoralized, frustrated, want concessions, but we're not organized. But on the right, you have these never Trump Republicans, many of whom work on the Lincoln Project and put out these, to be fair, incredibly effective ads, attacking Donald Trump on behalf of Joe Biden's campaign. I mean, when you think about how organized the right is, how organized corporate politicians and the corporate wing of the Democratic Party is, and how all these individuals are helping the Biden campaign with real material goods. Again, we have to be real about where we are on the left and what we're up against. I think starting this conversation from a place of, not really understanding how little power we have. And how, by the way, that's not to say we won't ever have power. If we're not real with ourselves, I think that the conversation, the debate starts from a place of, I don't know. I don't want to use an insulting word because I really admire Briahna and I get what she's saying, but we just need to be real about where we're at.
Totally, yeah. Like we right now, we're not in a position to will an electorally viable third party into being. Like that's just not a thing that we have the capacity to do right now. Like you were saying, I think that's a really important point about the Lincoln Project and these kind of hideous, like neocon, like never Trump Republican ghouls who, yeah, absolutely. To be real about this, will have about 1,000 times more influence in a Biden administration than we will. We're not in a position to we're not in a position to start an electorally viable third party. We're not in position to exercise some sort of leverage that would even extract pretend concessions during an election, which, like most good things that Democrats say during elections probably wouldn't happen, never mind like real meaningful movement to the left, that just can't happen right now. So the question is, what are we in a position to do? And I think what we are in a position to do is to, in some swing states where it could actually go either way and where a small number of leftists could actually make a difference, if if we know that the leverage thing isn't going to work, and look, don't get me wrong, I think that there could be circumstances in which it might be worth taking huge risks if there's a potentially huge payoff. But right now, I just don't see what the possible payoff is to taking that risk that Chomsky's talking about at the end of the clip. I don't see what we get out of it. So what we are in a position to do is at least make this kind of defensive maneuver so that we can give ourselves more time to get our act together. And I want to be really clear about what I mean by that, because I'm not trying to do some kind of like cheap apocalyptic, like, oh, if Trump is reelected, we're all gonna, Jacobin's gonna be closed down, we're all gonna be in concentration camps or something like that. I don't think any of that is likely true, but I think that a phrase that doesn't get used nearly enough when the left debates this is the NLRB, right? National Labor Relations Board, because I think that in terms of what's concretely at stake in the election, that's huge. That if you look at Trump's appointees to the NLRB, they have overturned a bunch of precedents from the Obama administration and earlier. Every time they overturn a precedent, it's always in favor of bosses and against workers every single time. There was an article in the New York Times the other day about how a bunch of people in Trump's cabinet are trying desperately to push through all these regulatory changes before January 20th, when they figure their guy's probably leaving office. And the regulatory changes were all things like making it easier to reclassify people as independent contractors so you don't have to bargain with them. And so I think we can be real about the fact that Biden is not and never will be our friend. That these are both, to maybe put it dramatically, but I think accurately, these are both enemies of the working class. But we can still make a tactical decision about which enemy we want to fight with, about which issues for the next 4 years. And even though they are both, representatives of the other side, I think that they represent very different strategies for managing the system on behalf of capital. And that the strategy that Trump is employing is really about trying to stamp out what's left of organized labor in the United States, whereas maybe like a centrist Democrat like Biden would do more like the kind of thing that Obama did, maybe pass trade deals that decrease the bargaining power of industrial unions, maybe try to co-opt them in some ways, but is really not going to try to stamp them out the same way. So given that we are starting in such a weak point, I think one thing that would be really good to think more about is if it's going to take another 5 years, 10 years, who knows, right, for the left to really get its act together and really build up to where we need to, is that process going to be easier or harder if, like, the Trump administration has succeeded in stamping out public sector unions?
Yeah, I'm working my way through Reaganland, Rick Perlstein's book about the 1976 to 1980 essentially, and honestly, as I'm reading it, I find myself more sympathetic to the argument that a Trump victory might be beneficial in the long run. I mean, Reagan challenged a sitting president in his own party in the 1976 presidential Republican National Convention, and then basically tanked the Ford campaign to allow Jimmy Carter to win, and then 4 years later took over the party, and the rest is history, as they say. And it's what kind of that side of the argument is advocating, like someone like Bernie should have done, which was maybe tank the Joe Biden campaign, and and then maybe 4 years from now someone can emerge, or Bernie himself, whatever, and so I'm looking at that and I'm like, man, they did that happened on the other side. Maybe like it could happen now. I think there's some of the conditions at the time were definitely different. I mean, for starters, Carter was one of the more right-wing Democrats to have come along in a good while. Did not pose as much of a threat to the Republican parties or interests as I think Trump would to the interests of like the left or labor or whatever. And then the other thing I'm thinking about is like the sort of the rightward shift of the Democratic Party that we all kind of bemoan, and we all are rightly frustrated by, that we keep doing the same thing and we can't break the wheel, is not limited to the United States. This is true in all the Western democracies. Essentially, is that it strikes me that there's something deeper going on beyond kind of the decision to vote for them or not. And I'm trying to like work through the argument on air, which is never a good idea, but I'm just trying to talk it out and see, like, because I think that the argument in the debate is an interesting one, and we should have it. I just don't. I still find myself unconvinced that 4 more years of Trump is gonna be beneficial to us. Like, at the end of the day, like, that's just what I can't get past. That 4 more years of Trump is gonna be a better thing than whatever the alternative is.
Yeah.
I just can't bring myself to that. I don't know. Maybe I'm like my limited imagination or something. You know.
Think about how many federal judges he was able to nominate and get confirmed during his first term. 3 Supreme Court judges. I know that Amy Coney Barrett isn't officially confirmed. She's going to be confirmed. And
if they have to wield,
that's devastating
like
to our cause moving forward. Like, it just is. It just is.
And it kills one of the Democrats' classic arguments, right? It's like the Supreme Court, and then like you know, and then they don't do anything to stop.
For sure.
Yeah,
especially
I know.
There's no way in hell Biden actually packs the court. That's never going to happen, unfortunately. But yeah, no, right, for sure. Amy Coney Barrett will be on the Supreme Court. I think even if like a bunch of Republican senators get COVID and they have to like wheel their ventilators into the Senate chamber to vote to confirm her, they will do that. So I think that's happening. That's over. But no, I mean, I think one thing that when people, because I hear this argument all the time from people who are on the Briahna, Joy Gray, Virgil, Texas side of this argument, that it's actually going to be better for us if not that they made this argument on bad faith, but they'll say it's actually going to be better for us if we get 4 more years of Trump. That'll be better than like 8 years of Biden, or whatever, 2 years of Biden and 6 years of Harris, whatever we're looking at, because then we can like try again in 2024. And I think that just the recent historical evidence really makes me think it's not going to work that way. That it's not going to work like Reagan in 76. And I think I'm very slowly working through the audiobook of Reagan Land while I'm like taking the dog on walks, and I'm still in like 1977. So I don't know the whole, but I know how it ends. I don't think it's going to work that way, and I think that just see why it's not going to work that way. Think about why Bernie lost this time. I mean, I know obviously he didn't lose for any one reason. And maybe if the centrists hadn't consolidated at the last minute the way that they did, maybe he would have pulled it off anyway. But I think the question is, why were so many people willing to vote for Biden in the first place? We know it's not because they agreed with his policies, because all the polls from primary states showed that most people in all the states that went to Biden supported things like Medicare for All and Green New Deal. So the reason is that they were desperate to go back to normal because they perceived Trump as such an apocalyptic threat. And I think if we had 8 years of Trump, I don't think a candidate like Bernie would get as far as he did in 2020. I think the longing of Democratic voters to go back to normal would just be totally off the charts. And I don't think people are grappling with that enough. And then I think that, like what you were saying, Nando, about how this is not just a U.S. phenomenon. Like, there's obviously some similarity between what's going on in the U.S. and what's going on in a lot of other countries. I think that like a more global problem, like if you look at like Jeremy Corbyn's loss in the last UK general election, other cases, I think around the world, is that right now this kind of like resurgent social democratic left that's manifesting in stuff like Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn, it has a base of support, and it has like a much bigger portion of the population that like likes its proposals, even if it's not necessarily married to those candidates or movements. But I think that right now we're having a hard time convincing the people that we need, because we don't have a majority who really align with those movements, that we're the best bet for fighting back against this kind of globally ascendant right-wing populism. A lot of people think that the best bet for that is just Joe Biden style liberalism. And I think that just about the worst thing we could do is, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure no matter what we do, if Biden loses, they'll blame it on us because that's what they do. But I think that like the worst thing Bernie, for example, could have done, just brass tacks, is to give them ammunition for that by like telling people to vote for Howie Hawkins or whatever, because like that would just be the story forever, that like, oh, look at how Bernie gave us a second Trump term. And I think that would be a really effective way of pushing back. And I think some people, when they say, oh, Bernie Sanders is super popular, so he could have done that, and then like, everybody would have flocked to Howie Hawkins or whoever. Who was incredibly popular at the end of the 20th century? Ralph Nader. He was like a widely beloved figure. There were polls back in 2000 showing that like there was a huge percentage of the population that like he would have been their first choice for president. And since then, he's just been a punchline and like a demonization object for Florida in 2000. And so I guess, I mean, look, I agree with everything that Briahna says in the clip about how if Biden loses, it's his own damn fault and all that stuff. I mean, yes, right? Preach, absolutely. But I'm super skeptical that if we try this kind of third-party strategy, the same thing isn't going to happen again.
And since we're talking about Bernie Sanders and the decisions that he made, he has done some campaigning, a lot of campaigning for the Biden campaign, and just this week we had a pretty lengthy interview with him over at the Young Turks, and I asked about this very debate, but I framed it more on not who should we vote for, but more importantly, when do we apply pressure toward the Biden campaign? And take a look at this exchange. This is the last clip, Kale.
I think we have got to do everything. You have all of 2.5 weeks. That's not a long time. Let us do everything that we can to make sure that everybody we know comes out to vote. Cenk, you mentioned that the polls look good. They do. They look good for Hillary Clinton as well. So anyone who thinks that Biden is a shoo-in is dead wrong. This is going to be a tough race. And we got to do everything we can in the next 2.5 weeks to win it. Day after Biden wins, let us rally the American people, working class people, people of color, young people, all people who believe in justice around a progressive agenda. And remember, Biden campaigns on his proposals, that's fine. But it is the United States Congress that makes the laws of this country. And what we have got to do after the election is to make sure that we put as much pressure as we can on the elected officials in the House and the Senate to go forward with an agenda that has the guts to stand up to the ruling elite, that deals with income and wealth inequality, and that finally has a government that works for all of us and not just the few.
So I love that answer. Although, on our show, we still continuously go after Biden when it's appropriate, and when I say appropriate, when he goes in the wrong direction with his policy proposals. But I will say I was actually shocked this week when Biden came out with his proposal on coronavirus. And he mentioned, an FDR-like strategy in order to combat the virus, basically creating public health jobs that would be tasked with testing and tracing. I don't have all the details in front of me right now, but I found that surprising because really at this moment, Biden has no reason to pander to the left in any way, shape, or form. But it does seem like he is genuinely interested in uniting the country and doing something, even if for the left it's small, something for almost every ideology. I mean, there have been policy proposals that are pretty right-wing, some policy proposals that you would expect from a standard corporate Democrat. And this coronavirus proposal was shockingly good from a left perspective.
Yeah, I mean, if he actually does that, that's fantastic. I guess I just think that especially if we're trying to reach out to people who might be on the Virgil, Texas, Briahna Joy Gray side of this argument, I think that they're going to be super skeptical of anything that say, oh, Biden is going to do this good thing that if he's elected. And I don't think that's entirely irrational. I mean, Obama said lots of stuff in 2008 that would have been great if it had happened, but that didn't really happen, right? So I totally get that, right? I think that I'd love to be surprised by this. I would love for Biden to actually carry out some of these good proposals that he's made during the campaign. I suspect that when the rubber meets the road and there's the inevitable corporate resistance to a lot of this stuff, that they're not going to invest a lot of political capital into it. That's going to be kind of the same story as like card check with Obama or the public option with Obama. But I think that I guess my only point would be that even if we make the most pessimistic worst case scenario prediction, that none of the good stuff that Biden says is going to happen, that like the worst parts of his career are really going to really going to be the preview of what his presidency is going to like, that the neocon never Trumpers are really going to be in the saddle, then it still makes sense to me to make this tactical vote, and I do think that I think that you should go after Biden all the time. Like, one of the things that most frustrates me about this debate is that it's so often cast as a debate between people saying Biden's not that bad and people saying we should vote third party in swing states. And I don't think those are the only options. I think that's a false dilemma. I think that we should think of it more like I remember Adolph Reed had an article in 2016 called "Vote for the Line, Neoliberal Warmonger. It's Important," where he used the analogy of this election in Louisiana, where David Duke actually got the Republican nomination for, I want to say governor, I'm not sure, but in any case, and then there was this like comically corrupt Democrat who's running against him, and so there were people who actually had like lawn signs that said "Vote for the crook, it's important," or like the attitude of like the French left when there have been these they have these two-stage elections. The top two vote getters get into runoffs. And so there have been times when the runoff is somebody like in 2002, it was Jacques Chirac, who was the justly hated conservative incumbent, running off against Jean-Marie Le Pen, who's an actual fascist. And so there were French socialists and communists who were doing things like bringing rubber gloves and clothes hangers to put on their noses, when they went to vote for Chirac, So like, I really like, I don't know, that just seems so much healthier, that like, you don't have to lie about who and what Biden is, but you can still, you can still say, look, we can make this tactical choice about which enemy we'd rather fight with, but we don't have to be dishonest to do that.
Yeah, I got to say, I was surprised at Chomsky's, seeming naivete about, like, he's like, well, take a look at his proposals on climate change. They're pretty good, and it's like they're far to the left of like anyone, and it's like, I have no. That's just, it seems like a very odd thing to like believe. Just like, it's on the website. That means it's gonna happen. I think that I agree with you that inevitably, like, there's this first sign of resistance, like that's just gonna go out the window. But like talking about the coronavirus plan or proposal for it, I don't believe any of it. But what I do believe is that, and this was like important in my kind of trajectory or whatever on this question, is like I do believe that in general a Biden administration, or just like a standard whatever Democrat administration, would have a sort of better, more competent more competent technocratic management over something like the coronavirus pandemic. Like, I think that it's true.
The Obama administration, sorry to interrupt you, but I have to say this. Like, the Obama administration failed on so many different issues, but there were, the way they managed the Ebola outbreak was actually very good. Right. And so I know for a fact that Biden is not going to politicize mask wearing. Right. Biden is not going to intentionally downplay the severity of the virus in order to protect Wall Street. Right. He might protect Wall Street in other ways, but I do genuinely believe that on a number of incredibly important issues, Biden will take it seriously. He's definitely not going to go as far to the left as we would like. That there's no question about that. And I agree with you. I don't believe that he's actually going to carry out FDR style policies. But I in putting out that policy, what he's doing is signaling that he understands the severity of the situation.
Yeah.
And we need that, because right now we have a clown who has no empathy. He's sociopathic, does not value or care about human lives. And that's what I'm concerned about. Like, we need to get him out and have someone with like a pulse and some understanding of the value of human lives in that office, rather than this. Honestly, Trump ended up being far worse than even I expected. And during the 2016 election, it was a wild card situation, right? Like, of course, people suspected that he'd be awful, but you didn't know how awful. So people were willing to take that risk in order to basically send a giant middle finger to the establishment. And I get that. But we've had 4 years. We're now close to 220,000 dead Americans during this pandemic. And I think it would be shameful to draw these false equivalencies between Trump and Biden. They are different candidates, and I do think that Biden would do far better on a number of important issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mitt Romney probably would have had better technocratic management of the coronavirus.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that to me, like, I mean, I think the feeling, I mean, obviously, like, I believe that, American institutions have been so hollowed out by neoliberalism that it would be difficult even for like the most brilliant bureaucratic manager of the state to deal with something like the pandemic. I think that the rot goes much deeper than just the management of the person at the top. Just watching like the Trump administration's handling of the coronavirus pandemic is just it's been so comically bad, that it's hard to imagine almost anyone doing a worse job on that front specifically, and it's gonna be like a thing that's with us for a long time. Like that's. I mean, I yearn for like the bare minimum of competence to handle this issue that is just like the ever-present issue in our lives right now.
It could not be more ridiculous, like how mismanaged it's been, right? I remember, my little brother lives in LA, works in the entertainment industry, and so he probably is more likely to think of these terms. He sent me, like, the night that Trump got COVID, he sent me a text message like, God, whoever's writing 2020 is such a lazy hack, like, this is ridiculous, like, as a plot twist. Oh yeah, of course, Trump himself gets coronavirus. And by the way, like, gave it to a bunch of donors, so which really, I mean, really speaks to the point, right? That I'm sure, like, I think you're 100% right, Nando. Like, there are like much larger reasons why American institutions have failed in meeting the challenge. But I also think that failure comes in degrees, and that it's hard to imagine anybody else messing it up quite this badly.